Welcome back to Before the Basket on IUSTV alongside Kara Adams. I'm Zion Brown, and Kara, it is finally tournament time.
It is. March Madness is here. Best time of the year. Cinderella stories. Who knows what'll happen?
Well, we'll get to the Big Ten tournament in a moment, but first, let's talk about Indiana's last game. A 66-60 win over Ohio State. On senior day, the Hoosiers were able to etch out a late win, and it was led by Trey Galloway hitting a 30-footer in the final minutes. Probably the biggest shot of his career, Kara.
Certainly, and that was awesome to see it go down from a guy like Trey, a guy who's been there since Coach Woodson has been there as well, and someone who's faced a lot of criticism this season. Just to kind of see him drain the three, it had to be a good feeling for him, and that was the three that secured the deal for the Hoosiers. But in that Ohio State game, Indiana struggled offensively in the first half. They were 9 for 29. They only had 25 points in the first half, but they kind of felt like if there's a will, there's a way. They were going to somehow find a way to win that game, and they did. They were able to come together as a team and close the game down the stretch, which is something we know they've struggled with before.
Yeah, and by no means was that a pretty offensive game to watch, right? Both teams kind of struggled from the field, but Indiana, between the Galloway shot and them just icing the game with free throws late, they were able to come out on top. And with the win, Kara, IU gets this huge bubble win. They sweep Ohio State on the season, but also beating another bubble team this late in the season. Just how big was that for the Hoosiers?
That was huge. It kind of felt like a must-win on Saturday in Assembly Hall. I feel like you could kind of feel the energy there because everyone just knew how important that game was. And kind of with that win, it really puts them in a better position for their NCAA tournament dreams. We talked about it before, and it was kind of like they can control their own destiny in a way. A win Saturday kind of helped secure the deal. Now they're probably still being talked about in those first four play-in games, but they definitely put them in a better position to definitely have that seed in the tournament.
Absolutely. You look at the brackets. I think most brackets have IU in as of right now, but things could change. But it's interesting to look at it, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in our next segment. So next, IU does head to the Big Ten tournament, and we'll break it down coming up next here on Before the Basket. The Big Ten tournament begins this week, and IU starts play on Thursday against an Oregon team it lost to just 9 days earlier. So, Karen, when you look at last week's game between IU and Oregon and going into this rematch on Thursday, what do you think are some keys for the Hoosiers in this one against the Ducks?
Well, I think the biggest one is no late game collapses. We all know what happened again in that Oregon game, a game Indiana had control of. They were leading with about 2 minutes to go, and then things just fell apart. Oregon went on a 10-0 run to close out the game. Indiana could not score. So I think just hold it together. No late game collapses. And I feel like they've kind of turned a corner on that maybe a little recently with being able to finish against Ohio State and whatnot, Purdue, those games. So just holding on, no late game collapses, and as well as if you can lock down Jackson Shelstad and Nate Biddle, on the defensive ends, then I think you can secure the win.
I think a huge difference is obviously last week's game was on the road. This one is an hour north of Bloomington. It'll be like 95% Indiana fans. I definitely think that'll make a difference.
Agree. And as well, I mean, Oregon's playing at 9 a.m. Oregon time. It's a noon tip, so definitely probably a little tricky with just the time change and just the travel for Oregon. But for Indiana, it's an hour north. It's going to be a home game pretty much for them.
So, yeah, that'll definitely play a role and a factor in Thursday's game. And if the Hoosiers are able to beat Oregon, they'll face a Michigan State team that they were the last team to beat Michigan State. They beat them back on February 11th. That was the biggest win of Indiana's season.
Certainly.
And now the Spartans have won 7 straight. They won the Big Ten championship. If we see that rematch in that game, Kara, just what are you expecting to look at, and what can we expect if those two teams face off again?
Well, that would certainly be a great matchup once again. I mean, Tom Izzo's squad is looking just about as good as they always do. He knows how to get them going around this time. But I think for Indiana, I mean, you did it once. Why not do it again? Kind of like Ohio State, since they swept them. They know they can play the 2-3 zone again, and that's what helped them in that win in East Lansing when they did win on the road against them. But I think for Indiana, it's just taking it one game at a time. First to get that first win against Oregon and then go into Michigan State. It's obviously a quick turnaround. You'll play noon Friday as well if they do win on Thursday. So one game at a time for Indiana and just focusing on the controllables, something that they have struggled with, but we've seen bigger improvements these past couple weeks.
It's really interesting to see. It felt like Michigan State was like on the downhill, right? When Indiana beat them, I think they had lost like 3 or 4 or something like that. It felt like they were going downhill. And then that game, I guess, just woke them up. Because since then, they have been amazing. But yeah, I'm really curious to see defensively, like you talked about, the 2-3 zone, if that game happens, obviously, to see how IU plays it, how much they played in that game, and if Michigan State has better answers for it going forward in that game.
Certainly, and you kind of mentioned it. Both these Indiana and Michigan State say they both have a lot of momentum right now.
Yeah.
They're coming off good endings to their own seasons, and so they're two hot teams right now, you could say.
Absolutely. Okay, Kara. There's a lot to be decided this week. We don't know what's going on necessarily. We don't know who will be where or what, but what do you think the Hoosiers will do overall in the Big Ten tournament? And then where do you expect them to be seeding-wise when the NCAA tournament bracket is released on Sunday evening?
All right, well, I think Indiana gets it done against Oregon, Michigan State. They make it to the semifinals, but I think they fall short there. Obviously, we'll see who they could end up playing on the other side of the bracket. But to me, this team is giving me kind of our freshman year, Zion, when they went on that run and they beat Illinois and Michigan to make it to the semifinals again. Obviously, lost to Iowa, but I think they go on a little run like that.
It'll be interesting. I don't know. I got a gut feeling that Oregon wins again on Thursday. I don't know why. Like I said, it'll definitely be an Indiana heavy crowd there in Gainbridge Fieldhouse. But I got a gut feeling that Oregon wins again and that IU is in the first four again. You mentioned our freshman year. I mean, it's not the same path, like you said. Exactly. Like you said, they made it to Saturday that year of the Big Ten tournament. But for some reason, I've got this gut feeling that they'll be back in Dayton. What say you? You think they'll be safely in the bracket, not having to go to the first four?
I think if they win on Thursday, they'll be safely in the bracket, not have to play in Dayton, which would just be huge for them in general. But if they fall to Oregon, I think they're back in Dayton.
Well, it's that time of year. We don't know what could happen. These next 3 or 4 days could decide so much. But stay tuned throughout the week at the Big Ten tournament. We'll have coverage all week on Twitter and Instagram at IUSTV Sports. And thank you for watching another episode of Before the Basket.